Today I'd like to share my vision with you of how to make the Python development experience on Ubuntu the best it could be. So as a disclaimer, this talk is not about the best IDE or editor. So it's not about Vim versus Emacs. So maybe you remember those silly discussions back then. In the meantime, we all know that Vim is better, right? But as a matter of fact, as the results of the Python Developer Survey 2022 show, the bulk of the users now either use VS Code or PyCharm, with a very long tail of other editors. So, no, I won't tell you which IDE to use. And I think it's even a good thing to have a development setup which is not specific to an IDE, especially when you think about collaboration with your colleagues or with some open source projects or contributors. Imagine you run all your linters via VS Code plugins and the other folks prefer a different editor. So it's very hard to sync the linter versions. So when we don't speak about IDE, what else do we need in our development environment? We need both Python, along with some libraries, and a couple of tools like a test runner, linters, formatters, tools to build the documentation. And these tools need somehow to get into your dev environment. But before I tell you about those, first about me. My name is Jürgen Gmach. I am a senior software engineer at Canonical, the company best known for creating Ubuntu. I work in the Launchpad team, so I take care of the build and the publishing infrastructure of Ubuntu. So anytime you do an apt install, this goes through my little machines or some mirrors. So if something doesn't work, you can blame me. So I'm not working in a Python toolchain team. And you might wonder, why do I even care about Python, the Python experience on Ubuntu? And I really fondly remember when I first got those shiny Ubuntu CDs back in the time, like 2006 or 2007, and I certainly enjoy Python as a development environment on Ubuntu to this day. But when you have been using something for such a long time, you tend to develop a blind spot for issues new users could face. And making the experience as smooth as possible, that's the motivation for this talk today. You can always reach out to me on Twitter or on Mastodon. I'm also one of the maintainers of talks, which will be replaced by Hatch, as we all learned on Monday in the talk by Florian. So good news, no more unpaid work for me. That's good. I'm also a fellow of the Python Software Foundation, and I live at the outer reach of the Bavarian forest. And that's all possible because of this new remote and digital world, right? But actually, that's not new for Canonical. We have been remote first and only for 20 years. And if you want to, I'm looking for a colleague. If you want to work with me, please reach out after this talk. But back to the topic. Let's speak about Python. What is even Python? So we all know it's the programming language, yes. It's also the interpreter, also yes. Is it the CPython implementation which most of us use? Well, probably. So you see, it's not a trivial question, and I don't want to even start with MicroPython or different implementations we heard about today. So, and what about pip, pyenv, and the friends? These are also part of Python. And now it gets hairy. They are certainly kind of necessary for a flawless Python development experience, but are they actually part of Python? When you ask the CPython core developers, they have a very strict opinion on that. And some of them would even suggest to not use the name Python when you deliver the Python interpreter without pip or pyenv. Others might not share that opinion. So pyenv is definitely a part of Python. It's a module of CPython. But what about pip? Pip is developed separately from Python. But what would you do with Python without pip? You can certainly run your applications, but development might be a different story. So let's speak about Python on Ubuntu. Well, this is a short one, right? Python just comes with Ubuntu, but not that fast. The Python pre-installed on Ubuntu is special. It's a fixed version. You will get security updates, maybe critical bug fixes, but no version updates. For example, Jammy Jellyfish, the as of now latest release of Ubuntu, just for the last couple of days. My colleagues are currently sweating, creating the latest Ubuntu release while I'm here and having fun with you. So Jammy Jellyfish comes with Python 3.10, and I created this little table because I can't remember all the versions myself. But what is when you want to try the latest and cool stuff, which is only available with Python 3.12? There is no opt install Python 3.12 available, and there is especially no opt upgrade Python available. So each Ubuntu version comes usually with only one associated Python version. Why is this so? Ubuntu makes sure the packages it comes with can be installed together. And Ubuntu comes with 10,000 of packages, so we need to test the compatibility. And there are also like 3,500 packages out there which directly depend on the Python interpreter, the Python package. 800 of them are binary packages, so maybe they make use of C extensions, and they need to compile it from scratch. Can you imagine what happens if you just quickly update Python 3.10 to Python 3.12 on Jammy? You also need to know that the Python installation which comes with Ubuntu is used by important system tools like opt, the package manager itself, and other tools. So it's probably not a good idea to uninstall Python 3.10 and install Python 3.12 on Jammy. And if you have, I hope you have nerves of steel, because I want to show you a couple of examples from Ask Ubuntu, the Stack Overflow flavor for Ubuntu-related questions. So this poor fellow cannot start the terminal anymore after manipulating the system Python. Or this one gets a traceback when trying to use opt, and I feel very sorry for those people. Honestly. Before we think about how we could prevent those issues, we need to investigate what actually is Python on Ubuntu. So, yes, it's Python, but not all of Python. There are a number of packages which are not installed by default. Most notably, this is the pyenv package. So when you try to run python-m pyenv, it fails. And this is certainly annoying. But why is this so? Ubuntu is not only a desktop environment for Python developers. It is also used in many other contexts. And at one point, it was decided to deliver a certain subset of Python as a base and offer ways to install the other parts. So if you want to have the complete access to all parts of Python, you need to install the Python 3-full package. So by default, it is not all of Python. But in some ways, it's even more than just Python. For instance, Ubuntu comes with the Python 3-YAML and the Python 3-requests system packages. So what is the difference between Python 3-YAML, or the system package, and PyYAML from PyPI? So Python 3-YAML is a fixed version from at the time of the Ubuntu release. It won't get regular version updates, but you get security fixes from the Canonical security team, and it's guaranteed to be compatible with other installed Python packages. So this is ideal if you want to write a long-term application, which needs to be maintained for many, many years. But there are also some pitfalls of using system packages. As mentioned, you won't get version updates, and you will have issues with a flexible deployment, as you can only deploy that application on the same Linux distribution where those packages are available. And you might run into issues with testing. When you think about Tox creates an isolated test environment for each test run, and as it is isolated, it cannot access the system packages. But there is a plugin out there called Tox currentenv, which disables this test isolation. With all that said, we have now learned that we definitely do not want to upgrade an existing Python version on Ubuntu. But how do we install a new one? And actually, there are many ways to do this. First, I want to introduce you to the deadsnakes PPA. A PPA is a personal package archive. It is basically a custom repository, like your own PyPI, but for deb packages on Ubuntu. The deadsnakes PPA provides additional Python versions, but only for LTS releases and only for Ubuntu, not for Debian or other derivatives. You need to install or add this PPA to your sources, and then you are finally able to install Python 3.12, or even the bleeding edge Python 3.13 or developer version. But you need to be aware that deadsnakes is not maintained by Canonical or by Ubuntu, by the Ubuntu community in general, but by down there, this single person from Nebraska. Actually, I'm not sure whether Anthony Sotal is really from Nebraska, and I just randomly learned at Python Pizza in Prague a couple of months ago that Anthony is not a single maintainer, but also Lukas Langer is part of the deadsnakes PPA team. But still, you need to trust those people. Keep that in mind, especially when you think about the recent XZ security incident. You could also compile Python from source, and this might sound scary, right? But at the end, it's downloading the source, installing a couple of dev dependencies, and then entering a few well-defined commands, like configure, make install. Oh, wait, maybe not make install. Don't use make install, but use make alt install, to indicate this is an alternative Python version and you don't want to replace the existing one to avoid issues with the system Python. So if this has not scared you, you need to be aware that this installation won't get any updates, no bug fixes, nor security fixes. You need to take care of that yourself and compile new versions from time to time. And you should see compilation from source as a last resort. As Stefan Bedel, one of the CPython core devs, mentioned earlier to me this week, when you just compile Python, you get something. So it's not an optimized build for your architecture or for your computer, for your setup. There's also pyenv. Pyenv lets you easily switch between multiple Python versions. It's simple, unobtrusive, and it follows the Unix tradition of a single-purpose tool which does one thing very well. At a high level, pyenv intercepts the incoming Python commands using a shim executables. You can imagine that there's some kind of proxy which intercepts the commands. And it then, at the backend, determines which Python version has been specified by your application and passes the commands along. This sounds perfect, right? But there is one thing that scares me. The first thing you can read on the project website is, lets you change the global Python version. And meanwhile, we know these things could wreak havoc on Ubuntu, but the maintainers certainly figured out a way to avoid any issues, hopefully. The pyenv also has the advantage that you can very easily install even a specific minor Python version. So quite a while ago, I needed to debug an error which only existed on Python 3.5.0, but not in the latest Python 3.5 versions. And here pyenv shines, as you can easily specify the exact Python version you want. There's also Hatch, where Florian told us more about that on Monday. This is a modern extensible Python project manager. So we heard about it on Monday. So reading the description of Hatch, we would expect that this is about building packages, so maybe running tests and other things, but actually Hatch can also manage Python versions. Unfortunately, I was not able to find information easily how this works behind the scenes, and I'm not currently clear whether you can use those Python versions for other projects or only for Hatch. And I have the impression that Hatch wants to become the one tool to rule them all. And this has worked very well for Golang and for Rust, but it opposes the Unix mantra, like of doing one thing and one thing well, which I usually like a lot. But I think we will hear a lot more from Hatch in the future. Rye is a comprehensive package and project management system for Python. It's born from the creators I decided to establish a one-stop shop for Python users. So this sounds familiar, right? So Rye provides a unified experience to install and manage Python installations. It was initiated by Armin Ronecker, the creator of the Flask framework. And this seems like just yet another standard on top of the many other standards. But if you followed the news in the last months, you might have heard of UV, the ultra-fast Python package resolver and installer, which is there to replace pip and other tools. And UV is seriously backed financially. And they announced that they want to integrate UV into RAI. So, with some money involved and some commercial interest, we are not really sure whether this will be the 15th or even the 16th standard now we can use, but I know that especially the team behind UV has already shown with RUF, the ultra-fast linter, that they can disrupt the Python ecosystem easily. So let's see. Then there is certainly conda, which I think most of the people here will be more familiar than me, as I have no data science background. Conda provides packages including various Python versions, dependency and environment management for any language. So it's not only about Python. So you cannot compare conda to pip, but more like apt and yum. It's mostly used in the scientific community, especially as some of the tools are a pain to install from scratch, and conda helps a lot. I think we have Janis Leitl here at the conference, who works for Anaconda on conda, and there is also my friend Rema Bauer, who has very deep knowledge of conda, and the many ways related to software, like to manage software like Mamba, Miniconda, and Pixie. Pixie, I just learned about last week, is built on top of the conda ecosystem, rewritten in Rust as so many new tools, blazingly fast, and it comes with built-in support for log files, and it claims to have better integration with PyPI. We also have a dedicated talk about Pixie later today, so please join Wolf Vollbrecht and Ruben Arzt to learn more about the project. So now we heard about a number of ways to install a new Python version of Ubuntu. And I'm 100% sure there are many more ways out there. So which is the right one? This might heavily depend on your use case, but most especially, this is also a trust issue. Do you trust Anthony Sotal, the maintainer of the deadsnakes PPA? Do you trust the pyenv maintainers? Maybe yes, but I think ideally Ubuntu would come already with all upstream maintained Python versions, right? But there is an issue. Let's have a look again at Jammy Jellyfish, Ubuntu 22.4. It comes with Python 3.10. And currently there's also Python 3.8, 3.9, 3.11, and 3.12 maintained upstream. So Ubuntu 22.4 should offer those, and including Python 3.10, those 5 versions, right? Python releases new versions every year, with Python 3.13, for example, already to be released in October. So when you run Ubuntu 22.4 in October, you certainly want to use Python 3.13 there, right? So while Ubuntu LTS releases are maintained for 5 years by default, with Ubuntu Pro you get support for 10 to 12 years. That means Ubuntu needs to maintain 5 plus up to 12, that's 17 Python releases with a single Ubuntu version. And this is getting out of hand, you know. But maybe there is a new way. Maybe you can think of a solution. And I thought we should all think about a better solution here. But we should also try to avoid to introduce standard, what is it meanwhile, 18th? This whole problem space also applies to tools. The versions provided by a given Ubuntu distributions are fixed, as we learned already. They do not follow the upstream development. For example, if you want to use RUF, the new kit on the block for linting with daily releases, you don't want to use a version from 2 years ago, apart from the fact it even didn't exist back then. So you certainly don't want to do sudo pip install and break your system. You can still find this kind of instruction in readmes out there, even today, and this is very bad. This would install the package into your global side packages, into your system Python. And as we learned, this can break your PC. And since Ubuntu 23.04, you cannot use pip this way anymore. There was a PEP about preventing things, and thanks to everybody who was involved in that. But as you know, now people even share workarounds to re-enable that bad way and to shoot themselves in the foot again. Like, why would you use -- break system packages with a command? But do you really need to install all those tools locally? There are a couple of tools out there, like pre-commit or tox, which can install and manage all your linters and other tools. So you only need 1 or 2 of those tools on your computer. The beauty of these tools are that the linters versions and their configurations are stored in configuration file, committed to your repository. So all contributors have the same configuration, independent of the IDE. And this also applies to CI. But you may want to have some linters installed locally, and at very least you need to have tox or pre-commit or hatch, right? For that you can use pipx. Pipx is an awesome command line tool which installs and manages other Python command line tools. It creates an isolated environment for each of your tools. So in a new system, I just do a pipx install tox, pipx install pre-commit, and I'm basically done with my development setup. So I use pipx to install tox, to run pre-commit, to run flake8. This sounds pretty complicated, right? But now you have one tool which does one thing very well, and you have everything in very clean and easy to read configuration files in your Git repository. This leaves us with the essential question. How do you install pipx? I'm afraid, I just saw I'm running out of time, so I'm happy to chat with that after. Just joking. I think you can use apt to install pipx, because pipx is rather stable, that's okay. So this sounds all very complicated. A lot of tools, a lot of options, but I think we live in exciting times. I'm especially curious how UV and the related tools will evolve. And at Canonical, we are aware that it is not very easy now, currently, to install in the Python versions. So if you have any ideas to make things easier, you have other paper cuts you experience, please reach out to me during the conference or via Discourse, see the barcode, to make Ubuntu the best Python environment it can be. I would love to start a discussion with you. Thank you very much for attending my talk, and thanks to the organizers and to the helpers, and thanks to Canonical for making it possible to be here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jürgen, for the very comprehensive overview. I'll start with the first question. Will immutable distros or package managers such as Nix solve this problem once and for all?
I've used NixOS for quite a while at my previous gig, and I liked it a lot. You can basically spin up a new shell with a new Python version easily. There are still some issues, because NixOS is very, very different from the usual Linux distributions, and some packages don't really work easily with NixOS, but I think that's definitely a way to do it. And as mentioned, the immutable distro, this is a thing also for Canonical. I think also Fedora has one of them, and it certainly can help to not nuke your system. Yeah.
Okay. Second question is, do you have an opinion about managing the Python version via ASDF? It seems similar to pyenv and lets you set global and local versions.
Right. I have not included this in my list. I have heard of it, but I have not used it myself before. So I think it's a similar tool like pyenv, but I have not used it myself.
Okay. Another question would be, does pipx also install new Python versions in a separate environment, or does it just set up the dependencies? Like, for example, just a bad example, if Tox needed Python version 3.11 or newer and you don't have it on a system, will pipx take care of that or not?
No, pipx only handles Python packages, like Python libraries, in the sense of Python basically Python command line applications. So you need to take care yourself of installing Python. That problem is not solved by pipx.
Okay. Another question from myself. I'm not a very experienced Linux user. Does the same problem exist with other Linux distros, or is this relatively specific to Ubuntu?
So this is, a couple of issues are maybe specific for Ubuntu. That's why I especially talked about this today. For instance, Fedora does it in a different way, and I think they do it pretty good. And when you install Tox on Fedora system via system packages, it automatically installs all upstream maintained Python packages. So I think they do a very good job in that way, and maybe this is something we can have a look at. The difference is certainly that Fedora, I think, usually only supports Fedora version for 9 months, and then comes the next. And for Ubuntu, as I just mentioned, we maintain those for 12 years. So this is about the exploding number of Python dependencies. So we need to think about the way. But we have already thought about one way. I don't want to disclose it yet because I want to try it, whether this works out. But yeah, I think different distributions handle those things a little bit different, yeah.
Okay. And maybe one final question, not to be an advertisement, but if you yourself personally need to install a new Python version on Ubuntu, which tool is your tool of choice? Would it be deadsnake or any other?
I like to use deadsnakes. I have been using it a lot. Anthony Sotal was a co-maintainer of Tox also, so I know him pretty well. And I also know Lukas Langer, and I think I trust them. I use deadsnakes for my development environment. Maybe I would not use it for production. So for production, at Canonical, we use only basically, in order to upgrade the Python version, we upgrade the distribution. We always follow the system Python because this is security maintained by our professional colleagues, and that's why we use this that way.
Okay, great. Thank you very much again for the talk. Put your hands together one last time for Jürgen.